Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Traci Stein. As always, I'm so happy to be here with you. Now, today's topic may feel a little bit heavy for some of you, but it's a really important one. And I'd like to start it reading you a poem that I will read in the beginning, and I'm going to read it in the end as well. And you'll see where this episode is going when you hear the poem. But it's one you may very well have heard before. It's something somebody sent to me recently, and it was exactly what I needed, and it made me sob at the same time. It's written by Mary Elizabeth Fry in the 1930s, and it says, "Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there, I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft starshine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die." And you probably have a sense now that the topic of today is grief. It's the one thing, as my friend John says, that every single person in the universe experiences, and that's true. And it's the thing most of us are so ill prepared for, because we can go our whole lives with everyone shying away from the topic. It can really activate people's fears of loss, of abandonment. And of course, we are wired to shy away from things that cause us pain. But I have to tell you that looking grief in the eye and facing it head on, and by that I don't mean fighting it, I don't mean resisting it, I don't mean drowning in it, but just sitting with it, which can be so hard to do, is really the only way through it. Just noticing the thoughts and feelings we have, they're our experience of the moment. That's the way through, I think, for most of us. So what's made me want to talk about that is not only that people I know have asked me for a while to do something a little more in depth on grief, but because, it's been a challenging few years for me. Some people know that, some don't. A very close friend of mine and ours passed away a little over a year ago, and it was just a really hard one. Grief is hard by definition, but this was an especially hard one. I had lost other friends in the years previously. There are times in my life where a number of family members died, and it triggered my own anxiety about death. I'll talk about that in a minute. And as some of you may know, my beloved dog, Loretta, passed away 2 weeks ago today. And the pet people will get this, because they'll get that she wasn't just, something I owned. She was my baby. And, because Loretta had had a lot of health challenges the last few years, and especially this last year, a lot of our days were spent with me holding her. She needed to be carried a lot, and she was a little Chihuahua mix with a big personality. But I was so used to feeling her little body against my heart and feeling the weight of her. She kind of felt like carrying a toddler. And so it's not just the idea of her, but it's everything that people grieve, whether it's a person or a beloved animal. It's the physical presence, it's their scent, it's their voice, it's the little things they do. It's part of your daily routine. You come home and there are all these things that are almost an unconscious part of your experience of your world. And when someone passes away, human or animal, that changes. And for some of us, right, everybody copes somewhat differently. Some people, they just busy themselves to the point that the grief gets put off to the side. And what we know from the research from one of my former professors and a great person, George Bonanno, who's an internationally known researcher on many things, but grief among them, is that most people thankfully have a resilient course, a trajectory where they emerge resilient. It does not mean that there's no feelings about it. It doesn't mean that they never have any struggles about it, but it means that they're functioning and they're able to live a life that involves the present and the future and not just the past. Right? That person or that animal that they've lost becomes incorporated into the understanding of their world. But it's actually healthy that the deceased does not remain an every moment part of our awareness, because that's not how it's meant to be. Now, not everybody has a resilient trajectory, and this is not to make anybody feel bad for the path that they're experiencing. You'll know you're someone who should seek help if your trajectory is that you're feeling worse over time, or there's no change, or you're unable to engage with the life that is before you. So that's really important. If anybody's in that place, please do go and seek some help. I think a common feeling, and something I talked about with my friend Kathy the other day, is that, when we feel such pain with a loss, we can also feel like we're betraying the being who has been lost to us. We're betraying them or their memory by not feeling continually awful. That if we let go of the grief, we will let go of them. And that's something that's come up with a lot of my patients in therapy over the years. And I know on other episodes I've talked about how grief doesn't just have to be about the loss of someone living, but that's what we're talking about today. Now, if I were going to give this episode a title today, it would be something like After-Death Communications, Grief, and Healing. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that I've had transpersonal experiences my entire life. So this is a part of my worldview. If it's not a part of your worldview, that's completely okay. I don't feel like there's only one way to go through life. Please know that. But since early childhood, I have experienced, a variety of psychic phenomena, including seeing, hearing, feeling spirits from time to time. Now, I'm not a professional psychic. I'm not a professional medium. I don't have any aspirations to be so. But I feel like all of us actually are receiving information through our other senses, not just the normal physical senses, all of the time. Some of us more than others. But there's an opportunity for that to be healing, if that's something you're open to. And I want to segue a little bit into what we know about that, actually, even from the psychology literature. Because I know some of you are saying, well, how do you know? Honestly, at the end of the day, this is kind of something that requires a little bit of faith. You're either going to say it's possible or it's not. We're going to unpack the possibility of whether this feels like it's a fit for you to think about having a connection to those you love after they pass, to us being more than the physical body, which honestly most of the world believes. It's true. Regardless of your religious beliefs or having none at all, most of us kind of have some sense that we and everyone we love were connected by something beyond the physical, and that we continue in some form afterwards. Because I don't think anybody would go to any sort of religious services, to be completely honest, if they didn't think there was something greater than themselves and that they themselves had some aspect of that within them. But I digress a bit. But grief is universal, and it's okay. And even as someone who has engaged with people and animals, mostly people, and honestly, mostly people that I didn't know at all or didn't know well after they've passed away, I still feel grief. I still have worries. Is this person or is this animal okay? Especially if it's someone you've cared for. Personally, I think the losses of beings who have cared for us or of ones we have cared for are the hardest, even if you've had a conflicted relationship with them. But after death communications, I'm going to define that. It just means some sort of experience of someone who has passed away after they've passed away. After death communications are actually quite common, more common than you think. So, according to, I think it's a 2018 Pew Research study, survey rather, over 70% of people like me and possibly like you believe that there's more to us than just this physical body. Over half said they had had the experience of some sort of after death communication with someone. And I'm not talking about hauntings or anything like that. I'm talking about you have someone in your life, you love them, they pass. You're going through your grief process, whatever it is. Maybe you are hearing their voice faintly, or maybe not so faintly, or having dreams that feel like more than dreams. And a medium would call that a visitation. And those tend to feel different than a normal dream about someone. Or maybe you're thinking of them and something pops into your mind that feels like it's not quite from you, but from that being. And it gives you information you didn't otherwise have access to, and honestly tends to be helpful. So that's a really common experience. Now, I remember years back, I worked at Sloan Kettering. Some of you may know that. I haven't really talked about that on air so much, but Memorial Sloan Kettering is actually one of the top cancer hospitals in the United States. I would say it's one of the top cancer hospitals in the world. That's not the only disease that they help treat, but it's the primary one. And lots of people have great outcomes going there. Incredible research going on there, incredible clinical care. But many people also pass away. Every illness is not curable, and every person is not curable. And we all have a path. We are all here for a limited time. So I remember going to one of these behavioral science service lectures, and I can't remember, believe it or not, if it was Susan Folkman who was speaking or if it was somebody speaking about this paper that had recently come out, because it's a while ago. It was in 1997. But Susan Folkman is now retired, but is one of the biggest researchers on stress and coping. Her work is extremely well known in, behavioral science research. And when she was earlier in her career in the late 80s, she was invited to work with gay men who had HIV or AIDS. This was when most people outside of healthcare were first learning about the AIDS crisis. And her work looked at stress and coping. But what she found, she and T. Ann Richards found, they are co-authors on this paper that I'm going to reference that appeared, I think, I can't remember which journal it appeared in, but I will look. I'll leave the reference in the show notes, because if you're like me, I like to look things up. If somebody says something, I like to look it up and learn more, or say, oh, how do I know this is so? But basically, they were asking some open-ended questions. And as they did about coping, people voluntarily and spontaneously started talking about spiritual experiences. And the people in the study I'm referencing were partners of men who had HIV or AIDS, and many of whom wound up ultimately passing away during the course of the study. And so they had this data that they looked at, and what they found is that it's actually quite common for people across religious traditions, including those without any religious affiliation at all, to have felt they've had some sort of spiritual experience, some sort of connection with someone they loved after they pass away. And in this study, that's what they found. It was not uncommonly reported. Most of the time, people found this to be healing. Now, what a lot of skeptics or critics will say when they hear about stories of after-death communication, especially if anybody's done any research into that, is they'll say, well, and this is true with research on mediums as well, and we can get to that in this episode, maybe in another, I don't know, we'll see where we go. But they'll say, well, if people are coming through saying, I'm okay, I love you, I'm always with you, I want you to go on, you don't have to grieve for me. Well, that's awfully common, and that's not, well, of course, that's easy to come up with. Who doesn't want to hear that? It's be more convincing if they came through with something that the recipient would have no way of knowing. And I get that. But I have to tell you, if you are the person who is grieving the loss of someone, what do you want to hear? Not that they remember your social security number or a statistic or, something else that is, like completely unrelated to your primary concern was, are you okay? Do you know I love you? Do you forgive me for the things I wish I had done that I didn't? Because, a subset of us will go through this process and think, obsessively about, oh my God, I could have done this, I could have done that. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? There's thunder right now. I don't know if anybody can hear it. And Zelda just got up to shake, so she's in here with me. Zelda's also recently bereaved. Zelda's my other dog. But honestly, who the hell cares about most other things when they're recently bereaved? You want to know, are you okay? Are we still connected? Do you exist? That's it. So I don't need a lot of persuading, not only because I've had firsthand experience. Mind you, the times when I've been bereaved, it's very few and far between in terms of the experiences where I've heard from someone I really wanted to hear from. And, the mediums I know, and this has been my experience, is that when we're grief-stricken, it's actually harder to tune in. It's harder to notice psychic information. It's harder not to dismiss it, which actually happened with me recently, where I thought I heard Loretta barking very faintly twice within the week after she passed. And then I thought it must be a dog outside. Now, mind you, my house is far from the surrounding houses. My street doesn't get a lot of foot traffic. And when I had a session with Anna Kloka, the pet communicator who's been on another episode, that's one of the things she brought up. And there were other things that were completely uncanny. I don't doubt that Loretta is still alive in another form. I don't doubt that my friend Mark is still alive in another form. And I know he's doing great. But it's hard to actually tune in and accept what we perceive when we are grieving. Again, just another aside. But, this is not the phenomenon of after-death communications is not unknown to healthcare workers. It's not unknown to chaplains. It's not unknown to hospice workers. It's not unknown to people like me, psychologists or other mental health professionals who've worked with a lot of ill people. When I was later on in my doctoral training, I went and I worked in pediatric oncology with some very ill children, some inpatient, some who never left the inpatient unit. They might have been inpatient for a year or more and unfortunately did not survive, and others who thankfully wound up doing much better. But I'm telling you this because I want to tell you an anecdote about a relatively young mom. She was probably in her 30s, and she had come to the hospital from another country to bring her, basically 1-year-old for cancer treatment. And this little boy was there and passed away shy of his second birthday. And I would see her and some of the other moms on the unit because I was there 5 days a week. I would stop by, I would talk to a lot of the moms. Sometimes the kids were young enough that really the work was more with the parents. And I remember her coming in for a session, and I hadn't done a lot of work with her. It's more that I had known her from being on the floor and seeing her, and she hadn't really wanted therapy before, but she came in and met with me a few weeks after her little boy died and before she moved back home. And she said, "Can I tell you something?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "You're going to think I'm crazy." And I said, "I will absolutely not think you're crazy." I didn't know what she was going to say, but she said, I forget where she was, but she was doing something, some mundane kind of chore. And I feel like that's a time when it's easier for us to perceive people who've passed because we're just kind of in a meditative, lightly trancy state because we're focused on something that's just kind of somewhat mindless. And she said she heard something at the door and she turned and looked and there was her little boy. And she said he looked absolutely beautiful, like radiant. And she knew he was okay. And somehow he communicated that to her in the way a 2-year-old could. And often this doesn't even require words. And he was there for a few moments and then he wasn't. Then he kind of, faded away. But she said it was incredibly healing because all she wanted to know was that he was okay in some form. A really simple story. A lot of times the most impactful things are not crazy dramatic. Now, sometimes the after-death communications will come through another person, like a medium, or through a friend who happens to be connecting with you, and they happen to have, a latent or natural mediumistic ability. And that's happened with me when I've been around people whose family members have passed, and I'm more comfortable with giving the information if I have not met the person and I don't know a lot about them. Because then I can only give what comes through. But again, I'm not a professional medium, and much better if it comes to you directly, I think. But again, it's such a normal experience. I have another friend who would love to hear from her beloved father and really so misses his presence, but finds heart-shaped objects and things everywhere. And this has gone on for well over a year since he passed. And she knows it's his sign for her. And you know what? I believe it. What we know is that after-death communications can be extremely healing. The idea is not so that you never let go of the physical connection to the person or animal who has passed. That, I think, isn't great for us because we need to be in the now and we need to create our future in the now. But I really believe everyone who's ever been part of our world is part of us and vice versa. So, there are other studies, there are other things we could talk about, but I don't want to take up too much of your time with this. there's interest, I'll do a follow-up. There are other studies. Some of you may also be familiar with Dr. Gary Schwartz's research at the University of Arizona. He has published a book on this and many scientific articles with a number of mediums. I have met and gotten to know one of the mediums. I won't say which one it is because she's not taking on new clients at this point. But talk about designing study after study, trying to control for every possible other explanation. When somebody comes through with information, very specific information about someone who's passed, things that are not on Facebook, things that are not Googleable, things somebody could not otherwise know. And I've been very fortunate to receive messages from other people, to receive them directly. One of my earliest ones was after my grandfather passed. There were 2 times, maybe 3, when I experienced him. And that was an incredibly painful loss, but I've never forgotten it. And they came at a time when I really needed to know he was okay. And knowing he was okay transformed the experience for me. It didn't mean I didn't feel grief. One was the night he died, and I heard his footsteps walking into the hallway outside the room where I was staying, because we were at my great uncle and aunt's house because he had died suddenly while we were visiting. But I heard him, and I smelled his very specific scent. And I felt him. And he said something to me that made no sense at the time, but was later clarified for me and made perfect sense by events that later unfolded. And I'll tell you what they were. We were at his brother's house, my great uncle Murray, and my grandfather passed during this visit while they were outside of the house. It was traumatic for everybody who was there. When my grandfather came down the hallway and said, "Hi, honey," in the way he did, and I said, "Oh, Grandpa," I was in this weird, confused state. I said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're okay. I thought you had died." It was the middle of the night. I was sitting up. I'm glad I didn't see him because it would have freaked me out at the time. Now it wouldn't, but it would have then. But I could hear him, I could feel him, I could smell him. And it was clear as a bell. And I remember looking around the room, like I know I was awake. But he said, "I'm okay, honey. I'm just worried about Uncle Murray." And that was it. And then he was gone. He delivered the message he could deliver, I guess, within hours of passing. What was interesting is I was 19 years old. I had met Uncle Murray a number of times, but he lived in Florida. We lived in New Jersey. I did not know him well. I would not have known about his daily life or habits. I had not known at the time that he used to be kind of a heavy drinker and smoker, and had quit. And when my grandfather said, "I'm just worried about Uncle Murray," I told my mother that later. And I told my grandmother that later. And it made sense because within weeks after my grandfather passed, I think my Uncle Murray was so traumatized by this, he started drinking and smoking again after not having done that in years. And that's why my grandfather was worried. But it would have been beyond me to have that concern myself. And there were other times when I saw him and he was absolutely radiant. One other time I saw him, and I knew it was a brief visit. I knew he had passed. I had been grieving him for about a year. This was extremely comforting, and it helped me to move forward. Now, I want to also address that it's normal for people having the experience, but also people hearing it to say, "Well, how do I know that's real?" And this is what I'm going to say. It's my take on it. You're going to conclude what works for you, and I'm 100% okay with that. But my take on it as a human being a human being who's had these experiences, and as a psychologist who had spent most of my career working with very ill people, including people who were terminally ill, who did pass away, working with their families, I can tell you that I don't think it matters whether the communication is real, quote, as in the deceased person really visiting or not. I think they probably are visiting because it's so common. But I think what matters is that people tend to feel better. And it alleviates or helps to take the edge off of our greatest fear, is that our loved ones, what if they're not okay? That's my take on it. Without further ado, I'm going to read the poem again. And I want to just add a little anecdote to this, shed a little light on why I'm reading it. So when Loretta passed, as you know, was not okay. I'm okay. You can be okay and know you're okay, but not feel okay in the moment. And that's kind of, I've been moving in and out of that space. The 2-week mark is easier than the 1-week mark by far, but I still miss her. But an incredibly lovely lady that I've met through an online training that we've been doing together for a few years now saw my post about Loretta and knew, I haven't posted on my professional pages, but she'd seen on my personal one that Loretta had been sick and that Loretta had passed. And she found a photo, and I got this manila envelope in the mail, and I opened it up, and there's a picture of Loretta, and she had typed, "I love you" under Loretta's picture. And she sent that poem, and I sobbed, honestly. I was so moved both by her thoughtfulness that she went to the trouble of doing this, a woman I've never met in person. I will, but I haven't yet. And this is also a woman who lost her only child several years ago. And 100% is acquainted with, honestly, I think it's possibly the worst kind of loss you can experience is to lose your child. And her thoughtfulness and her kindness and her wanting to contribute to my healing, for a little dog that she never met and a woman she has not yet met in person. I was so touched. So I want to say thank you, Debbie, for your incredible thoughtfulness. A lot of people have been so kind. I will never get over people's incredible kindness and understanding what this has felt like. And again, this is not my first rodeo. I've lost a lot of people in my life. I've lost a lot of animals over the course of time. But I so appreciated the compassion for my grief. So I'm going to read the poem again one more time. And what I'm going to say is, if this is something that resonates with you, if you'd like to share some of your own experience of hearing from your loved ones, or share, what you think just generally, please do. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And I'll read the poem now one more time. And again, it's by Mary Elizabeth Fry. It was written in 1932, and it's been published a number of times. It was, I think, published by Dear Abby back in the day. And I think there's a reason that it's endured. So it says, "Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there, I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft starshine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. And as always, until next time, be well.